Something to Pierce is the 10th full-length album from Sadist. This is a Genoa, Italy-based progressive death metal band. And we could call them a progressive metal band at this point, but they are best known as being one of the earlier progressive death metal bands to put out a notable release. They are probably best known for Above the Light, their 1993 debut. In some ways, they've never really called back to that era because it was stuck in that era. Then they are a progressive metal band after all. The lineup, a lot of things changed quite a bit beyond that point, where they leaned into surrealism, jazz fusion, world music, as we would call it back then, where you get a lot of arabesque and Afrocentric kind of rhythms feeding into death metal in a unique way. Their signature has always been something pretty unique. The records have always been focused on everything from alternative metal to like experimental things, but very much a lot of keyboard-driven work in the past. So if you're heading into this record having enjoyed all of the variety of their past work, you're going to get a lot of very intense, intentionally slightly more aggressive vignettes that feed into this record, less so like a new themed record. So we'll get a sense for what that sounds like here from a clip, and then I'll describe how this fits into their discography and how it's different from the previous record, Fire Scorch.
So many lost things of this office, their ways bring back memories. We will wait for death as if they were killed.
So the founder, guitarist, and main composer, Tommy Talamanca, is essentially someone who makes a soundtrack level composition for each thing that he does with this band. And what I mean is that there's a feeling of orchestration to a lot of what he does, and that comes out a little bit more in his treatment of keyboards and the way that he produces a lot of this music so that it flows together, the instruments work together, and there's a certain level of finesse there that is above the sort of learning curve of progressive death metal, which often fumbles towards its ambition. These are very confident and accomplished musicians, no matter who he hires for this record. And I particularly liked Fire Scorch because it had some really stunning musicianship on it. It was an intense record. It was a varied record, and much like this one is, but it had kind of a throughway for its themes and a lot of the strange things that it did to stand out. And I think back then I'd compared that record with Tribe, their second record from 1995. And that is something that I would kind of cling to for this one as well, because we do get some of the more jazz forward experiments of their rhythms. It is very much focused on tightly written groove metal for the most part, and then the death metal kind of comes in to glue things together. Keyboards were very prominent on that 1995 record, and not all of their albums beyond that point have been so focused on it. So this one particularly is, in terms of not only accentuating the groove but creating the atmosphere for the record. Atmosphere is such an important part of this album in general because it is meant to be much more aggressive. Something to Pierce was touted as something which was meaner, more direct to the point, and more violent compared to Fire Scorched. And I think that's generally true. It's also less focused though, so what we get are vignettes and 3 to 5 minute progressive metal pieces, which are often showcasing a technique, a sound, something that was that caught their ear, and they extrapolated into a groove or a bigger death metal song. So it's definitely a progressive metal record from my point of view, in that it changes shape, it changes timbre and tone, and it moves between all these things pretty frequently so that every song is different. And so we're getting a lot of these funkier, different rhythms that are just outside the wheelhouse that most people are willing to play with these days in terms of the kind of standard progressive death metal sound. So in some sense, it feels like it is pulled out of the 90s, and in others, it's obviously from here and now because of the level of technique and presentation. They're always doing something a little bit extra to stand out, and you can, even on the 10th album here, you can still feel that they are. I wouldn't say there's a ton to say about this album. I think it's just something you're going to have to sit down and listen to track by track and enjoy it. It's not really a listening experience in terms of it all tying together feeding a concept or anything else. It's really just a collection of their best tracks right now, and you can tell they put a ton of work into all these and made a big production out of it. It's a great sounding record, and it's an entertaining record. I don't know that it's going to convince you if you weren't convinced by their previous records of the level of skill and consideration they put into everything. As a longtime fan, I think this is a solid above average record from Sadist. Solid record. It released on March 7th. Go ahead and check that out yourself. That gets a moderately high recommendation from me. Go ahead and read my review for more details.
We're not to